All right, everybody, welcome to another Friday Night Live. It's been a while, I know. Just been buried in a lot of different projects, different things. We're going to have a whole month full of these, since it's Inktober, obviously. Welcome to Inktober with Watts Atelier. We're going to do, Eric's going to do a night, Doug's going to do a night, I'm going to do 2 nights. So we're going to do them the next 2 Fridays, and then we're going to switch to Sundays because our semester starts. So we'll be doing them streaming on Sunday instead of Friday, but they're still the kind of same concept. So what I'm doing tonight, this is a pretty ambitious piece that I worked on for the online inking program phase 3, which was figures, portraits primarily, that I focused on. Doug did landscapes, animals, and architecture in his phase, which is phase 2. And then phase 1, which we just released, was more ballpoint pen of all those different subject matters that I did. And then we went into quill, and we went into brush. So tonight I'll use a combination of probably some quill, some brush. I like to mix the two together. I'm more dominant on brush because it's just more of a favorite tool for me. I can handle most of the subtlety that you could get with a quill with a brush, but quill does have a very distinct look, and so I will be using some quill if I think it's appropriate. And also just to show you guys. So this is a Solomon J. Solomon interpretation of one of his paintings. He's kind of an unsung British painter, late 1800s, taught at the Royal Academy with Alma-Tadema, Sir Lawrence Alma-Tadema, and Lord Leighton, and him. So so he's quite an amazing talent. It's just not as prolific as some of those other ones, so you don't see or hear as much about him. But this particular piece has always spoke to me. I did these 3 figures as a master oil painting phase that has not been released yet. But it's a really advanced phase, probably the most advanced painting phase I've done up till now. And so I also wanted to revisit this particular piece in ink because I felt like it had the dynamics and it's just had so much cool classical figurative stuff in it that I could actually get my teeth into. And it's also been done so long ago that obviously it's more public domain stuff, whereas I can't do like Wrightsons and Frazettas and things as much as I would like to. So this is going to be me interpreting a painting into an ink. So I've got to go from color tone. So I've converted the painting that I had into a black and white. So I don't have to worry about the color. It doesn't really bug me that much. And then I had to go and interpret the clean tone into linear descriptions that describe those forms. So the knitting together of this lyrical style of penciling is as unique as artists. You'll see lots of inkers do different kinds of stylistic approaches before they actually start the inking process. Some are extremely anal, have everything planned out. Others leave huge gaps where they're going to use more improvisational inking to allow themselves to explore the area if they're very familiar and extremely adept at anatomy. They may not need as much guidelines in order to go in and actually work out an area because they're already very intuitive in that area. The less intuitive you are, the more prep you probably have to do with your pencil. Just common sense. But the tools I'll be using, here's a Da Vinci Maestro number 2. I've got, I think, a 2, a 3. There's a 4 actually here of a Da Vinci. There's a 3 as well. So I've got basically a 2, 3, 4. And I also have a couple of Winsor Newton Series 7s. But I've been leaning towards the Da Vinci's, the Maestros. They're quite expensive. All of the inking brushes will be. This is $25 for this one, this number 4. But they'll last you a long, long time. So you'll have a little bit of an investment on the front end, but on the back end, they last a long time if you just clean them with a little Castile soap or some soap, little oil on them, and then just put them aside and don't smash your tips. The main thing you don't want to do is have them so that the tip is bent up against something that you're transporting in, and then it stays that way, and then you pretty much have to chuck the brush. So don't do that. If you have the plastic sleeves still on them, keep them, put them back on them. I always lose them, but I usually keep them in a little bend that I carry, and I make sure that bend's not tipped on its side or doing something crazy. So if you look through this piece, this was demoed. I was primarily talking about the back. We got into some drapery. When you choose whether to go with or against the form with a linear line, and then how much pressure sensitivity do you push on that line, because as you push on the brush, it's going to widen the stroke, and as you let the pressure up, it's going to thin the stroke. So if you're pulling off of a coarse shadow, for example, like for the deltoid, or along this trapezius insertion, you're going to want to start with a heavier hand and let it go. Start with heavy hand, let it go. And you're going to let the pressure sensitivity up as you move away from that core. in order to make it look like it's rounding. But when you do that, you also need to be conscious of expanding and contracting this depth or the distance you're pulling out away from it. So it's like patting your head and rubbing your stomach at the same time. It's incredibly complex because you're pushing and pulling shorter, longer, 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 shorter, 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 shorter. And you have to remember that you're pulling away from a core, so I got to go thicker first and then let the pressure up, thicker first, let the pressure up. And so you're thinking about how wide am I going, how long am I pulling, how hard am I pushing? And that's where it gets really complex, and that's why it taxes your dexterity to the nth degree. It's one of the most amazing ways to develop dexterity, and that's why I primarily still teach it, is because painters will find it extremely beneficial to have a superior, anyone would, a superior dexterity. And then it comes down to, well, how do we put that in place as quick as possible and as efficiently as possible? And what are the best means to do that? And you can just paint, 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 or you can also come to inking and learn to interpret form, learn to design shape, learn to contain shape, learn pressure sensitivity of the utmost level, and then carry it back into oil painting, carry it back into gouache painting, carry it back into charcoal drawing, graphite drawing, and you're going to find your hand is just that much more fine-tuned and elite. And then you won't have as much problems with those mediums, and you can then worry more about abstract design, cross-contouring, knitting, really complicated concepts that a lot of people struggle with because their dexterity, quite frankly, just isn't up to snuff. And then their knowledge base is suffering as well. So if you have a limited knowledge of this back musculature from academic study and your dexterity is rocky, that'll be a nightmare, right? That's a suicide mission. But it doesn't mean don't do it. It just means when you do it and it doesn't work, then you need to ask yourself, what do I do now to get to where I can do that? Well, you might have to go back to doing some academic anatomy study in charcoal, in graphite, sketchbook work, ballpoint pen work, which is a little bit easier than the quill and the brush. And so it doesn't mean don't do it. It just means be respectful and use it as a learning tool to help you understand what it is you should be studying and how you should be studying. So tonight what I want to try to accomplish is this central Samson figure. What it is Samson and Delilah. If you don't know the story, it's biblical. It's basically where she has just cut off his hair. His hair is what has his power. These guys are all trying to restrain him. You've got guys holding him by ropes. You've got a guy holding his head. You've got a guy clinging onto his arm. This guy's got his leg and arm, and this guy down here just got clocked out. He's got the little scissors next to him, and this is a fun little figure down in the corner with a cool little head, very Joseph Clement Cole. I kind of channel different inkers depending on what the subject matter speaks to me as. I'm a big Frazetta fan, big Wrightson fan, big Booth fan, big Gibson fan, Montgomery Flagg, Klee, Cole. All those are people that you may or may not be familiar with, but they're really the old halcyon days of inking, back when inking was really a medium of choice, before we had color printing, before we had a lot of the stuff that illustrators would use and later painters would use. This was a very popular medium for print and storytelling and this and that. So inking was, there was a golden age of it kind of around the late 1800s, early 1900s, into the 1900s, where it was really quite popular. And now it's kind of a dead language. I would consider it similar to Latin. If you know Latin, it can be very helpful for you to use it to find the derivatives of the English language and figure out what is the definition of a word, just by breaking it apart into its Latin, aspects. But you don't use Latin anymore, really, right? But it's still very helpful. So to me, inking's very helpful as a training tool, but it's probably a medium that you're not probably theoretically going to use professionally as much as it used to be used. But you never know. There's guys like Schultz and Gianni and that are doing this old school style of inking, have kind of brought it back and done their own thing with it, self-published their own comics, and they do extremely well. Because another thing you could think about is there's nobody doing this anymore. So if you can do it at an elite level, you kind of have an open road to just reinvent and bring it back into the fold, and you could probably find a little niche for yourself that you could do incredibly well with. So Doug, who did the other part of the inking program with me, who took the class with me probably, 6-7 times, taught it with me numerous times, does a lot of it professionally. And ballpoint pen and other inking like Frank Miller, Mineola, The guy that does framed ink, I can't think of his name offhand, but that can be really good for storyboarding, initial concepting, visual, and still for concepting, you can still use inking. So anyway, enough jibber jabber, cool figures, beautiful rhythmical, elegant line, beautifully composed piece, very lyrical, very Frazetta almost in its staging. Can't say enough good things about it. Really a masterpiece this particular artist was able to pull out. So, okay, what I'm going to do is when I warm up, I'm going to warm up with an area that's not his head or this hand, because that's too delicate and I need my hand to be totally tuned to do that. So I'm going to wait and I'm going to pick a more obscure area that if I mess up down in the drapery or something, dark drapery, that I can just, snuff it or, figure it out. It's not going to be as big of a deal. So just be logical when you ink. I'm good about for 2 or 3 hours of inking and then I do something else. I don't normally ink straight through for 6-7 hours. I think it's foolish. I think your hand's gonna start cramping up on you. You have to grip in a very, like a lot of times when I work in charcoal, I work like this. When I work in this, I have very unique ways of holding it, because really what I'm more interested in is the brush being very stable or the quill being very stable and not being loose and goosey, because it can get really sloppy on you and get out of control. So what I like to do is really grip it in such a way that the brush there's no really room for it to be squirrely, and I can just use my pushing in and out of it in order to control it. So it's a pressure sensitivity thing. And in here, this is just an abstraction of drapery, and I could handle it 1,000 different ways. Could handle it more like a watercolor, putting in washes, and you may see me do some of that. I could put it in more more of a Wrightson style, where it has a bit of Booth in it. I could go with, any number of things. So a lot of people say, well, why don't you just do it like you? Because I don't ink 24/7, and I don't really have a definitive style. If I was to, choose this to be my inking, my medium of choice, one that I was going to hang my hat on for my career, I would definitely do it enough to where my style would start to evolve. But a style is very hard earned. It's not something that just is bestowed upon you or happens just accidentally. It's thousands and thousands and thousands of efforts of doing it over and over, to where you start to get quirky little things that make you interpret a certain way. It's your knowledge as it grows. So it's all kinds of things that reflect on getting a style. So for me, a lot of times what I do is I kind of absorb another person's style that I like, that resonates with my personality, and that allows me to get my sea legs and also just to learn. Because again, I'm primarily learning here. I'm not really trying to do an ink that I'm going to sell or something's going to happen. But I do like to say, I think that feels kind of coalish, or I think that feels a little bit like a Wrightson. Because these are guys that's all they did is ink. They weren't really painters. They didn't do a lot of, in my opinion, wonderful paintings. There was a handful, like Edwin Austin Abbey, who was a phenomenal painter and inker. Frazetta was one of those rare phenoms that could kind of skirt between the two different mediums of ink and linear knowledge and linear expression and tonal expression almost effortlessly. It was just, he could easily just skirt between those two languages. And this is some rope. So what I'm doing is kind of flowing with how it kind of twists in on itself. And you notice how I'm just kind of skipping the central section, because that's where the light's hitting it most. So I'm starting from here, jumping, picking up. Starting, jumping, picking up. Sometimes going all the way through, because that would be one of the strands that's actually more going all the way through. But that's how you, and see, normally what I would do is I would take this thing and I would flip it so that I'm pulling away from myself, because I don't want to give you guys vertigo and I don't want my camera guy to pass out. I'm probably going to force myself to ink a little bit oddly, which is not the best, but to make so that I don't have to do that as much.
So a question relating to that, would you say that rotating the image is a crutch or excuse for lack of wrist dexterity?
Nah, no, not at all. It's some things just are better done away from you. Like if you're coming off of a core or something, pulling down towards you is foolish. It's hard to control. I'm going to say it's foolish. Some people may do it well. I don't like that way of pulling. I have really good dexterity, and I find it better to pull in a certain way for me. Now that may be individual to me. I don't sit and talk to inkers every day and sit and go, okay, how do you guys do this? For example, I want to go up this. To go up like this or like this feels extremely awkward. It just doesn't feel like I can pull the pressure sensitivity. It has nothing to do with dexterity. So I might turn it like this. And then I look at my reference, and it would be nice to turn your reference the same way. But I have some pencil that's already in there but see, this is so much more easy for me to push and pull the line weight than if I'm trying to pull it down like this. It just doesn't feel right to me. It feels like you're forcing something that doesn't want to go that way. So I think use your common sense. Now, if you're a lefty, I don't know what your choke up's going to be, or if it's better to pull or in a different manner. Those are things you'll have to figure out if you happen to be a left-hander. But you guys are used to adapting, and it probably wouldn't be that big of a deal.
So you're kind of saying like choose the path of least resistance. If it's
I think so. I mean, just common.
stroke easier,
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, it's like people that when you paint and they say using a maul stick as a crutch. It's hard enough. I mean, what do you want to do? I mean, just try to prove that you're some kind of hero just because. I mean, I have an incredible knowledge base and hand, and I am not. And I think I'm all about the path of least resistance. The intelligent way to do it is always the best way. Even if you can start from an eye on an oil painting and radiate out and finish a 32 person composition, I think it's foolish. Even if you could do it, it makes your job 50 times harder. It's not logical, and it's just showboating. To me, it's like, yeah, I mean, yeah, okay, great. It's a David Blaine, hovering or whatever, like magic trick. But it still doesn't, to me, definitely for teaching, it would be foolish to teach somebody that way because I think it's irresponsible. If they want to somehow at some point do that, or they have some skill to do that, by all means, do whatever you want. But I'm going to go for the test and tried, logical, intelligent way of trying to put things down and maneuver. And I'm gonna learn that from other people that have come before me, like Richard Schmid or someone that really I value their opinion greatly, and they've been through the trenches for 30, 40 years, and they can say, yeah, this is probably the best way to do this. And I'll say, okay, good, I don't have to reinvent the wheel, and I'll just take your word for that. I will always be inquisitive, and I don't just listen to somebody blindly. I'm always, but it depends on the source. And if I know the person is incredibly well-skilled and an amazing artist and a kind, generous person in their knowledge, I'm going to trust them. Most artists aren't going to lead you astray, but there are some people that don't teach and some people that just do things, and they have really cryptic styles and really interesting ways of doing things, and you can tell when you run up against one of those. And then it might just be nice to kind of observe that person, but maybe not try to ape everything that they do or something, or be really intelligent. So pulling away from myself for me feels a lot more natural, and it allows me, again, just to kind of get the knitting. And this is really, because this is some drapery that's coming off of his waist down here, and there's some little kind of oriental rug patterns to it and stuff that are on there, and I can't really tell in the image because the image is it's just not picking up all the little details. So I may invent some of my own or inject in a little bit of greebles and things around some of these swirly little shapes that I can't really discern very well from the reference. I may use a little bit of liberties there. Any questions coming in or anything? How are we doing?
No.
Okay. So as I warm up with this thing, I'm looking at this drapery pulling here, pulling here, pulling here. It's pulling from a tension point up here around his waist. And it's kind of slipping out from behind this rope. And so when I look at that, I want to look for my tension points. Then I want to ask myself, what do I know about this kind of drapery that I'm seeing here? There's a really dark spot right here, all along this area that I haven't filled in, is almost flat black in my reference. Now I could open up that area with my knowledge of the anatomy of folds and inject some information that I believe probably is there in the original, but I can't see because of the reproduction. Now that's something that's advanced, because that's basically invention. So invention is a last resort. I think it's an incredible skill set to have, but I would caution you to use it sparingly. It's a last resort. It's not necessarily a first option. So if you have to invent something, okay, do it. But if you can get reference on it, or you can follow some kind of reference, I would probably highly recommend that you do that. Now, Frazetta is a rare example of someone that, but even he used reference a lot more than he leads on. So with this, I mean, I could switch to a little bit bigger brush in order to fill in some of the darker darks in here. Now, this is, again, kind of like watching paint dry, watching me do this drapery. It's just a warm-up. I'm going to get into the fun stuff here momentarily. Just know that, everything in the piece should be done in a virtuoso manner and with lots of respect. No matter how, because you're going to get parts in the piece, like, I much prefer doing that head than a piece of drapery. The drapery is boring, but you got to try to almost put more energy into the drapery than the head, because you could really phone that in, and this drapery could detract from this other stuff and cause the piece to be way less of an effort if you were careless with it. So don't just phone in an area because you have lack of interest. Try to do those areas maybe first and save the fun stuff for when you're a little more gassed out, but also warm up better. But you know you're going to have a bunch of enthusiasm for that head. At least I am. And the drapery I know is going to bore the crap out of me. So for me, it's more going in and doing that drapery when I'm fresh. So so not only can I warm up on it, but I also can get it out, kind of get a good run at it. Now again, watch things like your hand going into wet ink and then blotting it somewhere on the piece. It happens it's very easy to have happen, especially if you're talking a lot and not paying attention. Sometimes I would use a bridge, but more on graphite when I'm smearing it than on ink. So again, where I push and pull, like if I want to push, let up, go back in between this little spot, push, pull up, and fill in a little gap in there. That skirting along just in these little areas in here, and the little cross-hatching pattern that I choose to put in there. Some of it's random, some of it's invented, some of it's just exploring. I know it's not an area that has to be like hard and fast, so. Okay, the torso is really subtle. I'm thinking about the abdominal, rectus abdominis. I'm looking at some ribs that are being exposed, some serratus coming in, and the oblique muscle being compressed on this side. Because he's elongated on this side, compressed on this side. We need to think about like George Bridgman in the accordion, where you take an accordion and you smash it, it opens up on the one side and it compresses on the other side. So when one side compresses, the other side relaxes, usually in the human form. So what we want to look for is the active side and the inactive side. So the active side is on the right, the inactive side is on the left. The inactive side is covered by this guy, so we don't really see the long flow of the torso, but we see the compression over here and a lot of information. On my reference, it's very flat, black, dark here. And since this is a freaking 1800, I don't have a copyright issue with this thing, so I'm going to show you the reference. So the reference looks like that. Okay, that's what I'm working from. Now you can see how flat black it is in here. I can't see anything in there. I mean, I can kind of see the indication of a fold here, which I'm imagining carries through somewhere in there. And I imagine this is rolling. I see this piece rolling here. So we've got a deep cavity here, probably deepest in here, and probably a little bit lighter in here. So if I wanted to open up some information in there, it would be through this area right in here. And I would invent a slightly lighter version, an invented version of that fold that I believe is kind of coming down and tucking out down in there somewhere. When I look at this part, I see this little funny shape right here. That's the xiphoid process. The sternum, it seems a bit low. I feel like it should be up here, but that's got to be what it is. That means the rib cage is coming down through here. This is rib turning, serratus, some oblique, rectus abdominis, center line here. The linea aspera, which is your center line coming off the sternum, right down. If you were drawing that, you would lay in your center line off the sternal notch right there. So this is what I'm working from. Notice the beard, flat black. Got to open that up a little bit. More like what I did with Delilah over there. So go ahead and put this back. Sorry, you guys, you're look at me for a minute. There we go. Okay.
So is there a reason why you would choose to pull your line with the form compared to against the form, or is that just preference?
It's a little of both. If it's a real dominant form that's moving, in a very long direction, like around the deltoid or something, I might pick up on that and want to go with it. If I'm going with it with too many forms, it gets generic looking and can look contrived. So I kind of let my gut and my instincts tell me I'm going too much in the direction, and I'll usually just throw in against the form direction wherever I'm at. So a lot of it is just kind of an intuitive feel for whether or not you feel like you're duplicating your directional patterning too much, which creates generic, too repetitious of design, and that's going to be boring. So we want variety, but too much variety will break a form down, and it'll break it apart ultimately, and it'll become fragmented. So the key is to balance between curves and straights, hards and softs, thick and thin, light and dark, and ultimately warm and cool, which we don't deal with now because we're not painting. But we need to look at all those, the language of line and how we French and knit those lines. When you say French, it's how things, kind of roll into another thing. So if you say like a fender on a Porsche or something, Frenches really nicely into the front. It's moving very fluidly into the next form in a very elegant, lyrical manner. So when I say French, it's kind of a, Frenching is kind of a industrial design term, slang. But it's really, you're looking for a rhythmical, elegant flow between straights and curves to represent form. Too many curves, too whimsical, we end up with wishy-washy spaghetti people. Too many straights, we get rigid, and we end up with stiff figures. We need a rhythmically structured figure that balances between curves and straights in a perfect manner, and there is no formula that you're going to find in any book that's going to tell you exactly how to do that. That's an acquired skill by watching other good people do their thing that have acquired it themselves, usually through watching some other good person walk them through, help them through, demonstrate for them, and fix stuff for them. So that's kind of how it's picked up. I know it's a very difficult, design is one of the most difficult things to teach. Some of it can be taught, some of it is an acquired thing that kind of happens over time as an evolutionary process of your development of copying usually really good people, emulating really good people, being around really good people. And some people inherently have good taste, but taste is as individual as artists, and it's impossible to really say, this is definitively the best way to do this. It would be nice if it was kind of like that sometimes, but it would be kind of boring. So I think what we want to do is ask ourselves what moves us, and then gravitate towards those artists and teachers and whatever that move us the most. And those will be the ones that influence us the most and will ultimately influence our design sense and how we do what we do. And hopefully that made sense. That was a mouthful. Wow. So here I have a coarse shadow right here on his forearm. And I have some reflected light, probably most likely bouncing off the chest, bouncing off this guy's leg, coming back up. In the reference, and this is what photos do, even this good photo that I got high res is still lying in the shadows. It's flatting the shadows black. I know that's a lie because of plein air painting, because of going outdoors and doing all my life work, working from live models. I know that that's a lie. I could flat black it, but I think it's going to look cheesy. I don't think it's going to look very good. So I will go in and open up that shadow. I will create a core where I know it should be, and I will allow some of my brushwork to allow a little bit of light to seep into that under part of that arm to separate it from the drapery of this guy that's coming up underneath it. And I think it will look more complex, it'll appear more elegant, and it'll ultimately look better. So there's my little coming along that core. Now I have an option to go against it and create a little cross hatching. That's an option. There's a lot of ways you could do that. So, then you would look and say, well, do I like the way, Frazetta does it? Do I like the way Cole does it? Do I like the way Booth does it? And you would look at different people's work, and you would use this as a way of kind of learning some of that. And so it's a master study, but it's a master study where there's a master study, like if I was doing a study of a Frazetta and I was interpreting an ink to an ink, then that's a whole nother type of study. This is actually taking a painting, interpreting it into an ink through lines, so the line has to be invented completely, and it's a little more difficult of a master study because I'm having to do the heavy lifting of designing my line work rather than just copying someone else that's already solved it for me. which is it's a good way to go. So if you might want to start out by doing more studies from other artists and inkers, and then work your way towards what I'm doing, which is interpret painters into ink. So you can see that reflected light now that I've created in there, the coarse shadow here. Instead of just flat blacking that whole arm, it gives more depth to the arm. It also gives some volume to the arm. And, again, some people would argue and say, I like it better just flat out, like a Mineola or a Miller would do. I said, well, then flat it out. That's your choice. I mean, it could look good. I'm not saying that the choice I made is the perfect one, because there is no perfect one. There's 1,000 different ones that could work. And that's what makes inking and learning this stuff kind of challenging, because if you're one of those persons that likes to have definitives, you're a perfectionist, you want to know how to do it, I want to know exactly how to do it, then this will be like pulling teeth for you. It'll be very uncomfortable, because that's not the way it works. Now so it's not, it's not accounting. So what we want to do is we want to, and I like that because it gives me opportunity to explore. It means I don't have to do something perfect. I have 52 different ways I can do it. That gives me a lot of leeway. I like that personally. I think that makes me feel a little bit better.
So speaking of master studies, have you studied any of the work of Hal Foster? He did Prince Valiant.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I have all the old copies, the big large format ones that were actually the same, printed in the actual size that he originally did them. And he's a favorite of mine to borrow. I'll borrow a lot of stuff from him. I borrow horses. I mean, if I want a horse for a Western, I might take it out of one of his and borrow it and put it in mine and switch it around a little bit and put an Indian on it instead of a knight. And yeah, I use him for all kinds of stuff. Storytelling, composition. Yeah, he was wonderful. Just a wonderful artist and prolific. Geez. So yeah, for sure. Some veins running down, some very subtle veins, and veins can look really bad. So be careful with them. You want to make them look organic. This whole arm is in shadow here. So, but there's little bits and pieces of tendon, bone protrusions in the shadow. So it's not a dark flat shadow. It's an actually shadow that has a lot of stuff going on in it. So there's information within the shadow, veins, things that have to be dealt with or left out or edited or whatever. But not an easy arm, man. That's a toughie. And really, the arm primarily is a cylinder, right? So if we want to pull around that cylinder and I want to come down, I'm not going to pull my lines like this. I can't feather them hardly at all. So I'm going to turn it like this, upside down, and I'm going to, ideally I would turn my reference the same way, but I have a decent pencil and I know kind of what I'm doing here, so I'm just going to pull away, barely touching the tip. Look at how subtle that is. Oh my, just really. So when I turn it this way and we look at that, see how that little hot spot running down there, it makes it look really nice. It's a very Frazetta-ish, Frazetta-esque style of rolling form. But you got, man, look at that. Your hand better, you just got to be able to drop it off like you're barely kissing that thing. I mean, those are subtle lines. If you're heavy-handed or you're shaking coming in or whatever, or you just had coffee or whatever, don't be drinking Red Bulls. Don't be going for a Monster right before you ink or something. Be well rested, have a good hand, no shakiness if possible. And see, now I'm pulling towards me. So it's not that I never do that, but it's harder for me. I'm just telling you. Now, so all teaching in art is a contradiction in terms. That will frustrate, again, people that want definitives. They're like, well, yeah, but you said you never pull towards you, and you just pull towards you, and you said that, now what's going on? And oh my God, it's like, don't be so literal. Never take anything I say with, as if it's carved in stone. It's just, I prefer to go away from me. That's me. Now you might talk to, you have to talk to 50, you have to line up 52 different inkers and say, okay, who likes pulling away and who likes pulling towards, and all of them are dead, So I don't know how Frazetta pulled his lines. I can assume by looking at how they're thick to thin that it's going, I know, like, just trying to pull doesn't do that well. Pulling away does it very easy. So I'm thinking that's probably how he did it. And it doesn't really matter. It's kind of semantics. If I can get my piece to look like that person, who cares? If you pulled towards, you pulled away, whatever works for you. And that's the main thing. At the end of the day, it just has to look good. It has to represent, it has to explain what it is that you're doing in an intelligent, articulate way so that the viewer understands what they're looking at. Otherwise, it becomes gibberish, in which case we can't tell a story very well if we can't get past the gibberish. It's like someone trying to tell a story that's stuttering constantly. It's like, it's hard to follow them. It's hard to be able to understand what they're saying because it's too cut up, right? You know, I mean, it's like you can't follow it, you know? So you don't want your paintings and your drawings to be like that. You don't want to be visual stuttering. So in order to do that, we need to articulate in a way that makes sense, reads accurately and inspirationally, so it excites the viewer, entices them to want to look at it. Okay, now we have a cast shadow from the hand onto his torso. So in here, here's the torso, or excuse me, here's the hand, here's the torso. We have a cast shadow from this arm onto this torso. We know in drawing that cast shadows are hard. Okay, so we do need a hard edge along here, and that shadow is wrapping around various pieces of information. Those informations are pieces of anatomy: cartilage, bone, ligaments, tendon, fat pads, all that kind of stuff. So the more we know about what it is we're indicating, the better off we are at indicating it well. Okay? Now that's just, to me, common sense. If you don't know something and now you've got to go indicate it and translate it into some cross-hatching, cross-contouring, but you don't know what you're cross-contouring because you don't know what it is you're drawing, how is that going to work out? Probably not very well. So what it's going to fire us back into always is back into academic study of things. Anatomy, perspective, rocks, I don't know, trees, whatever it is, animals. We want to constantly be familiarizing ourselves through proper study of these things so that when we're in the heat of battle, we can just move through it and have some fun with it. Okay, so this little rolling serratus muscle, which is the sawtooth muscles that come out from underneath your latissimus and kind of grip onto the ribs, I'm going to leave a little bit of gap in there. And I'll take care of that in a minute, and I'll show you what I'm going to do with it. But this shadow is continuing to pass down. Now, we have either the quietest group tonight. I hope I'm not boring everyone to death here.
So do you have any tips on pulling long, uniform, straight lines?
Whew. Have a good hand, man. I mean, if you're pulling along, you just got to practice that, and don't do it slow. That's one thing I would say. It's easier to pull quicker than it is. I mean, you don't have to go fast, but pulling lines a long distance, you know, you just got to, again, have a firm, and if you want no deviation in the line, like you can use a straight edge of the end of a ruler, and you can take a metal part of a wooden ruler that has metal on it, and you can run along it that way and get a really, really long straight line. And just that's probably one of the best ways to do it if you're trying to just get a really, really long, clean line. You can use rapidographs, you can use different kinds of pens, you can use all kinds of stuff. So what I've been using primarily is one brush right now. I'm going to switch over to a brush pen, so this guy, and same thing, but now I don't have to dip it. It's just going to constantly replenishing itself, which is quite nice. And these are quite really, you know, they run different prices. You know, you can get really spendy with them, but they're really nice for long days of inking and not wanting to constantly be reaching over and filling stuff in, or, you know, or replenishing the ink. Now this is pretty dark in here, and it'll be easy to put in that dark with this particular
So a viewer asks, how do you handle clients who are very sensitive about their age? How do you find a balance between being accurate and idealizing them? I'm assuming for portraiture.
I know we're talking about ink or just in.
Anatomy too, and like in general.
Well, I mean, again, design idealization, the ability to idealize a subject matter of any sort, whether it's a person's head or most clients are going to want a very beautiful version of whatever it is that they're asking for. It's mostly because that's just what we deal with here in the kind of society we live in, which is more of a, again, we're working with selling product, selling paintings, beautiful things. People don't often pay for really ugly stuff. I mean, it just doesn't happen. Now you might say someone likes something that you don't find appealing because the aesthetic is different than yours. And that would be like, I don't like that because it's too over-rendered or it's too tight or it's too this. When we get into that kind of stuff, then it's stylistically, you can't please everybody. You just, you have loose painters, tight painters. You have clients that want tight work, loose work. They're going to go with what they want. They're going to find an artist that does what they want. So they're going to look for a client that wants a tight work is not going to go to, a Fetchin or something or some looser painter, a Manchez or something, and say, hey, I want you to do this because it's not his forte. So they're gonna go to this one. So when you're idealizing anything, you're putting it through a filter of what makes something look good. Now that's what we spend a lot of time training people in is aesthetics, like what makes a good shape, what makes a good looking arm, what makes a nice looking kneecap, what makes a cool looking everything. Everything on this piece, one reason I like it is it's well designed. I don't care if it's this little dagger or it's his ankle, or it's this guy's knee, or it's the drapery, or his hand, or the head. It's all very well staged, very beautifully depicted. If he gave this guy little tiny hands, big Samson, little mitts, you'd be like, what's up with that? What's up with the little T-Rex hands on this guy, That's not what you want to give him. You want to give him some big, powerful hands, and you want him to be chunky and gnarly and strong and powerful. So you want Frazetta hands, you want Bridgman hands. You don't want elegant female sergeant hands on this guy. So that's design. So you go to, you start thinking, well, I need to design this person's hand to look this way. This person has a strong jaw. I want to make them, when I think of this person, I think of them as a strong character. Well, I'm going to square the jaw off a little bit. But you could, depending on what kind of stylistic way that you're working, if you're a line decker, then you cartoon the hell out of it. If you're sergeant, you come in at a 10% deviation. You're like a high-end plastic surgeon. You're going for the person still needs to look exactly like them, but let's give them the best version of themselves. Let's tuck this. Let's get rid of that crow's feet, the little bit of those wrinkles, get rid of those. That little blemish, that's gone. Let's tuck this. Let's give them a little facelift,
Your deviation with purpose is basically the idea, right?
Yeah. Well, intelligent manipulation so that you don't lose the identity and integrity of what it is you're trying to express, but you express it in the best possible version of it. So it's always like, what is the best version of this eucalyptus tree? What is the best looking version of this guy's knuckle? What is the coolest looking version of this earlobe? What would make a really cool looking sweep on the eye? And so that's a tough question. It's a good question, but it's one that is, again, as varied as artists that exist. There's 1,000 ways to design, and usually, again, good design leaves clues. So I would suggest, as you're learning to design, that you pick, and I'm constantly bringing influences into my students and saying, hey, check out Nikolai Fetchin, check out Sargent, check out Zorn, check out Sarav, check out all these different people that maybe they've never heard of. That person, that one person that I turn them on to might be who really they resonate with so much so that that changes their whole career. That changes the whole direction of their design sense. That leads them in a completely different direction. That takes them in a completely different career or path or something, or helps them to go in the career path that they're choosing. So design and idealization is a fine art, and you'll find lots of artists doing it 10%, 50%, 20%, 30%. One guy I use as an example is it Kruger? The guy that does the stones, caricature artist, but he can go from hyper real to the most ridiculous and carries all of it off amazingly, right? He has a huge range with his ability to manipulate, idealize, whatever.
It's all portrait.
And it's all portrait. So if you want,
Jason Seiler.
No, that's it's Sebastian Kruger. Kruger does he did all the Rolling Stones, toured with them, did illustrations of them. Some of them are hyper real, some of them are ridiculously over the top, but just an incredibly gifted caricaturist. And caricaturists are always awesome to look at for what you're talking about, like how far can you push somebody or something and get the essence of them, because you're having to exaggerate so much.
So on the topic of aesthetics, a little bit more formally, a viewer asked, I'm seeing a lot of controversy regarding cross-hatching. Some say don't cross-hatch. Instead, lay opposing lines next to each other. And some say cross-hatching is fine. What do you think about that?
I mean, I stay away from definitives, like never crosshatch, and then you'll see like, someone like, again, Joseph Clement Cole, just crosshatch the crap out of it, what I mean, just all over the place with it. And it's so beautiful, and it shouldn't work, but it's amazing. So I think you got to be really careful with definitives. I think what we have to use is discretion with our choices and look at what it is we're trying to accomplish, what it is we're trying to say. Like I'm putting cross contouring all over the place and cross hatching. At times I like it, like if I look at what I'm doing here and this hand that's gripping on here, and I look at this delicate here and then this heaviness here, I almost want to come in and just break that up against that form because it feels like discordant with that other handling. Now it feels better to me. So sometimes I just have to look at the context of what area am I talking about. Do I want to go in and do a little moire pattern in there just to darken that area? I mean, if I want to get darker, I have to get closer knitted lines on top of lines to make it look like a darker shadow. I either have to drop my lines closer together or I have to go over the top of them numerous times, creating a checkerboard pattern that looks darker. So there's only so many ways that you can get something, the gradation of value in ink. You can do it through washes, you can do it through cross contouring, you can do it through knitting and working. The main thing is, does it read and does it feel good to you after the fact? And I think that question is a good question, but it has to be addressed in the context of what it is you're talking about, like what it is you're trying to handle.
Do you think that one of the things that I struggle with cross-hatching is that if you do it too uniformly, it doesn't convey any form at all, and so you have your limited how many times you can layer that before you just lose all the form?
Yeah, you can't just go willy-nilly at it. You got to have some salt, some logic, some intelligence behind how you're cross-hatching. And you've got to also have a very delicate, like look at this cross-hatching right here, just to roll this form a little bit. Put a little halftone on top of this arm, this hand, to roll it just a little bit. But I had to do that so delicate. If I went in too crudely or heavy-handed, it would not work. It would just immediately destroy the illusion of the subtle rolling of that form. So there's a complexion on this guy's hand. Like for example, the fingertips, as we go down the finger towards the end of it, just towards this front knuckle, it gets darker. And then it's lighter in this passage here. So how do I do that? Do I go against it like that? Do I turn it the other way and or do I pull towards me this way? Do I turn it all around and go against me? What I probably would do is go like this, and I'd go. So you take a breath, just like your archery, and let it go. So you scan, you identify, you predict. I want to go against, I want to go this way. I want to go with a light touch because I want a gradation towards the tip. How do I do that? Okay. Now you have to have the courage, the moment of truth. Your hand has to deliver the goods. This is where most people are going to fail. Why? Because their hand will not be subtle enough. To drop a gradation of form that's that subtle, that fades from dark to light. Okay, so you gotta have some dexterity. You gotta have really good. Now I can go, if I want to roll this a little bit, I can do the same thing. I can kind of go this way, then I can go back and go, okay, let's just feather now out a little bit more. Okay, there's a tendon that comes down the middle here. Let's go a little darker there. There's probably another little tendon right there. Now we've got this thumb here, very complicated rolling. And again, this little tip of the finger here, I could roll the form here to get it to grade 8. Away from us, right? Just for some variety. So it feels like those fingers now are kind of yeah, gripping and moving and got some motion, almost like they're really kind of digging in a little bit. It gives it some emotional validity to the actual what could be a very boring thing. That's a tough freaking. That's probably one of the hardest parts on that whole piece is that hand. But hopefully that's conveying it's conveying what I want to you guys. I hope. Okay, go ahead.
Relating to master studies, a viewer asks if you have tried inking from a wood engraving like what Franklin Booth did he copied Dore's prints. He mentions that it would seem like that's a good way to build dexterity.
Oh, that'd be fantastic, of course. Yeah, no problem. Yeah, engravers are awesome to look at, wood carvers. Booth is one of the ones for me that I absolutely love his work, but he's one of the more cryptic, difficult people for me to decipher. And I'm not quite sure why. I really haven't dug into tons of his work. Maybe it's a little intimidating to me. I don't know. It's very advanced knitting, really, really. And I see, Wrightson using a lot of it. And again, like I said, I'm a good inker, but I'm not like I don't ink all the time. So I can't sit here and say, yeah, I ink 24/7, I have a good hand and I love ink, so I'm good at it, but I could be a lot better at it. I could get a lot, and if I was going to, I would take 6 months and do 32 booths, and I would just rip him apart. I'd rip apart his whole style. I would just sit and I would hyper obsess and I would buy everything. I'd find everything I could on the internet. I'd buy books on him. I would sit and I would do studies of little areas and I'd look at how he does bark and I would look at how he does clouds and I would look at how he does, somebody's head, and I would just sit and I would break him apart and I would do studies. I would do pencil studies. I would do ink studies. I would do ballpoint pen studies, and I would just become Booth for 6 months or a year. And then after that, I would let it go and move on to someone else. And whatever was meant to stay from what I just studied from him would remain, and the rest would just go. I don't know what that's going to be. So I can't, so that's the way I would go about it probably. But I'm very fanatical. I'm very serious about when I'm studying stuff, and I go at it like a detective, I go at it, I go after it. And so not everybody's going to be that fanatical and crazy, but if you want to absorb someone's style, you want to absorb what they do, you literally have to kind of you got to walk in their shoes for a while. And if you're jumping between 5, 6 different guys and you're only doing a little bit of study here and a little there and this, that, you're just going to get confused probably and get overwhelmed with all these different cooks in the kitchen telling you, showing you different ways of doing things. So I think at some point you have to kind of prioritize and then get a game plan and then work consistently to absorb that particular. You could do that with painters. You can do it with anybody. It's not just inkers. I mean, that's how I would approach a lot of things, is in that way.
Yeah, Travis and I were talking about that earlier, how like at a certain point you have to pick not just the artist you like, but you have to really dial into, okay, I want to be like that person in a specific way.
Yeah.
Isolate it and pull it out.
And sometimes you won't know it until later. So you have to you just say, I love this person's work. I don't really know why, but I feel compelled to really dig into this person for a while. And just let yourself have that time with that person. Now that's the luxury of being a younger artist that has time on their side to be able to do those kind of explorations. When you get a little older and you have to make money and you've got responsibilities, it's a little more difficult to be able to do that. So what I would advise is do that while you have the time, because you won't always have it. And you always think you will, but you won't. So I think, that's why I tell people, when they're thoroughly studying in their 20s and 30s or up into the 30s, and you'll be studying for the rest of your life, for sure. But when you have that time that you really can dedicate to your studies, do be intelligent about who you are taking the time to actually study. So yeah, sit and really, if I come into class and I say, hey, I think you should study this person, but it doesn't resonate with you, I would override my advice. And again, I'm usually very cautious about what I advise people to study. I get to know the person. I get to know where the direction they're going in, what kind of career you're going after, what do you like. And once I know them, then I'll be very poignant about who I bring forth and say, I think this might be a good person for your study. I'm not going to force someone who's doing concepting to study Nikolai Fechin. It's just, you look at him, but probably not where you should be putting your energy. Maybe over here. Good guy to look at, cool, but I think it's probably time spent better elsewhere. And so I always as a good teacher, try to direct people's energies with intelligence as to what they're trying to accomplish. Now, it doesn't mean that what they're trying to accomplish might not change. At some point, they may, want to be an animator and then fall in love with painting, and before you know it, they're like, well, I don't really want to do that anymore. That's what got me into art, but I kind of outgrew it. And that's, well, it's okay. You have the right to do that. Now, some really delicate stuff going on there. I have a couple choices. I could force every one of my lines to go in the same direction, and that's one way of inking, which I think is really poetically beautiful, but I haven't done it on some of the other figures. So I probably won't adopt it now on this figure because I think it'd be discordant to have one figure have that treatment and a couple other figures. I kind of did it on this figure here, where you see that most of my lines are radiating with his back, the way his back is flowing, and then occasionally I'll cut against it. But most of them, I had that idea to do that at first because I saw Frazetta that I loved a lot that had that going on, and I thought, man, that's a neat treatment. I like that. I might want to use that one for that guy's back. But that's where I don't want to glue like a Booth here, a Frazetta here, a Cole here. I want to try to make when I'm done with it look like it's a cohesive piece. So that's one of the downfalls of studying so many people while you're a student is you'll look like 10 different people did this ink. And it's going to be a little bit of that with this one because again, like I said, I'll be the first one to say I'm a really good inker, but I'm not a professional inker. I mean, I probably could be, if I chose to, but I'm going to be, finding my way through this piece like anybody would that doesn't, if I'd done 7,000 of them, I'd be like, I'm just going to go and do my thing, and it's going to come out looking like me.
So speaking of, are there any contemporary inkers that you admire?
I'm not as right now. I know they're out there, and there are some really great hands floating around. On Instagram, I've seen a lot of stuff that I really enjoy. Spanish guy that's really good. Can't think of his name offhand. I'm terrible with names, so it's just awful. But there's people out there for sure. I don't know them by name always, but I do think there's plenty to look at around. But I would just go to the dead ones personally. I think, when I'm looking at stuff, I usually track it back to who they studied from or where did they get this information rather than studying contemporary as much. Not that I'm opposed to occasionally doing that. But yeah, there's some great inkers out there. There's great artists all over the place right now coming up. And we're heading towards another golden age of art, really, I think. And we have a lot of things that are tugging us around. We got VR coming up. We've got digital. We got a lot of stuff all over the place that's really cool. So I'm not saying it's going to be necessarily a golden age but traditional art is coming back strong. There's just a lot of good people. I see, a lot of people training better now. There's a lot of ateliers popping up. Ours, other ones, there's all over the place. Florence Academy, Grand Central. There's a lot of cool stuff happening. So I think we're going to see some really neat work being done, beautiful work being done in all areas in the next 50 years, 100 years. Pretty sure. So it's cool. It's a good time to be alive, good time to be training. It's kind of nice because back in the days when the good people were around, man, you had to be like when you had Rockwell, Leindecker, Cornwell. The best of the top notch, you couldn't even touch. And then the second notch was better than the people we have now probably. And the third notch, it's like it was so competitive that you could have been insanely good and still had a hard time having anything happen. Whereas right now it's just coming back, so there's a lot of opportunity still. But then it's gonna start taking on that same flavor where you're gonna get some people that are gonna keep pushing forward, and you're gonna get some exceptional way. Oh my God, look at so and so, and those guys are gonna be, those people are gonna be way out in the front. And but there's plenty of work out there for everybody, and there's plenty of opportunity. So don't let any of that stuff ever hold you down or intimidate you. Just set out to be the best technician and craftsman you can, if that's what you like. I'm a craftsman. That's what I like to do. And not everybody is that way. So I think everybody's supposed to be that way because that's the way I am. So I have a bias towards it. So I try to be careful with, sometimes I ask myself, doing an inking, like all the inking phases we just did online and we're releasing 60 hours of this kind of inking. Is it just going to be crickets? Is anybody even going to want to try it? I don't know. I like it, but that might just be me, So I still do stuff anyway, in spite of whether I think it's monetarily viable. Is it a good business choice? most of the program I put together is really designed for people that really want to develop elite skill sets, to be able to really push themselves into high level execution, whether that's digital or whatever medium they ultimately choose. But it's designing a really high level finessed eye and hand that can pretty much do anything. Now, that takes a lot of time, and a lot of people don't really want to spend that kind of time. So I get that, and my program probably won't work all that well for them because it's probably coming in a little too heavy. So I get that, and that's okay. There's other programs out there a little more chill, or you can try other ones. Proco with Stan, who's an understudy of me, but is doing a wonderful job of kind of coming in with more just user-friendly, introduction stuff. Although we have a good introduction with Brian and all the stuff we've been coming up with. So I think, really, you just got to try things and try different people and try different programs and find the ones that work for you. And you may start with Stan and end up with us. After you go through some of the stuff that he's doing, you might say, well, I'm going to go over and do that inking phase with Watts Atelier, and do this because it's, now you're more ready for it. But you may not be ready for it in the beginning. So, but anyway, I'm still going to do what I do, which is just try to do the best stuff I can and try to do it at the highest level possible and hope that there's enough people out there that still value that, that they want to learn that. But yeah, when you're watching this stuff, so you see these choices I'm making. We've got Serratus, ribs turning like in an arc here. The xiphoid process has a little, I might want to go against it, just a little stroke like that, just to kind of pull a little bit of that and stop that form a little bit. Now in here, the linea aspera goes right up here. This is your center part of your abdominal wall. Now he doesn't have ultra ripped up abs. He's one of those like big, bulky, kind of like a Greco-Roman wrestler kind of guy. He's not like Bruce Lee ripped up. So now on the reference, there's a change in plane here where the rib cage is turning, and then underneath it we have oblique muscle right here, and this is kind of a rest area in between the abdominal wall and the oblique. It drops and then goes again. So right here, what I'm saying here, I need a hard line there. I need to contain that shape. Now ideally, there's a darker core up above it and a little reflected light in here. So it needs to be crispier. If I shoot through with those lines, I will destroy that pinching effect that I need to get there. Now this is also where one of the abdominal walls comes in. So the lower, there's, six pack, and then you get the navel somewhere probably under this guy's arm here, somewhere in here, and then the lower abs underneath it. And so there's a line coming across here, a value change in the painting. Subtle, extremely subtle. But I know it needs to be there because I know what's supposed to be there. And that's, again, I can think and go, oh yeah, I know what's going on there. I've studied that in charcoal. I've studied that in Erik's, anatomy intensives, or whatever. And you can reflect back on what you've studied and say, oh yeah, I know what should be going on there. And then you can kind of have a better idea of how to contain those forms. Now there's, in general, a value in here that I don't have right now. I just have the white of the paper. It needs to all be in shadow or halftone in here to make a cavity. And I don't have that yet, so I'm going to get there. And I'll move on to the head in a minute and just have some fun up there. So let's just try that. And now the oblique. Now there's a little bit of tone here. Okay, let me just...
So you mentioned that a lot of the golden age inkers did work for stories and publications.
Uh-huh.
A viewer is wondering if there's any stories or various intellectual properties that you would want to do illustrations of. So classical or contemporary, I would suppose.
Oh yeah, I mean, God, there's so many. I would have loved to have taken a whack at like Prince Valiant or something. I mean, like I know Gianni. I think Gianni's doing it now.
He's doing some Game of Thrones.
Oh, is he? Yeah.
Ice and Fire stuff.
That does not surprise me. But that would have been a fun one to take a whack at, just because of the knights and the whole thing would have just been so fun to you know, to just get into. I would have loved that. You know, there's some of Frazetta's, you know, story stuff that would have been fun to take a whack at too. Not so much like the Johnny Comet stuff or anything like that, but I don't know. Yeah, there's all kinds of things I would love to do, but mostly just contemporary stories I would like to kind of adapt would be fun. Lord of the Rings stuff would be fun. There's a lot that would be really great. Spot illustrations would be great if they were still more popular, like Treasure Island and Treasure, you know, all the old classics would be fun to take a whack at, you know, like NC Wyeth used to do and all them. They were just such a fun time in illustration back then. I'm going to go against the form here in this rope. So the rope, kind of just trying to get that gnarled, and then there's a cast shadow of the one rope on the other. So I'll go underneath it and just kind of skirt along there, get that going. I want this to roll here, so again, really light, feathering away, feathering away, feathering away, to get that to roll a little bit on that corner.
Yeah, so the viewers would want you to extrapolate on that a little bit more on having hatching and cross-hatching matched a way a form rolls, and just elaborating on how you, I guess, essentially create form with hatching or cross-hatching to make a form look like it's rolling.
Well, so like again, for here, I think about like, okay, this rolls and pinch, rolls, pinch, rolls, this rolls and pinches this way, rolls and pinches this way. So we have some forms. This is where you really need to know your anatomy and topography, because you're asking yourself like, okay, this comes in here, and what happens in between here and here? And what is this? Okay, this bone, what does this bone do? Well, it makes a shape like this, right? So I'm inking along it, and I'm going darkest in the middle part right here so that I can roll that bone. So that bone, that's rolling like this. So if I just go straight, I'm not going to be rolling that form. It's going to flatten the form. So I've got to ask myself, what's happening here? It's rolling. It's actually doing a couple things. It would roll here and probably roll a second time somewhere right in here, because this is exposed bone. This is your rib cage, the opening of the rib cage. It's the Roman arch, they call it. And it rolls right in here. And I know that that's where it must be, because this is a xiphoid process, and the ribs come right up to the xiphoid process, and that creates your sternum right off of that, which the pectoralis is on either side of that. So what we're doing is a little bit of an anatomy lesson. In order to know how to roll your form, you have to know what the form is doing in order to know whether to go with or against it, and how much to go with and against it. The people who have most of the problem with wrapping form is because they don't know what form they're wrapping. They're not familiar with what it is they're trying to describe, so they're just doing random stuff and saying it doesn't work. And it's like, yeah, it doesn't work because you're not, like for example right here, notice how here I'm kind of going with the core, but I'm also coming up under here, and I'm going to roll like this more, because this is the bone rolling. Now when I go this way, I can go against this little, make this coarse shadow against this little thing, but this is a muscle, and it has to be hard on top, and it has to be soft on top. Soft on top, hard below. 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 It's good. We know there's above lighting coming down on this guy, because there's no other reason we get a cast shadow off of his hand onto his chest. So when we look at this, we say, where's the light coming from? Well, this is cast shadow from here to here. This arm's in shadow. It's got to be from above. It's really hitting his chest. So it's somewhere up here, coming probably through like some skylight in this room that they're in, coming down, hitting, casting. So once I know that, then I know that every form is going to have to roll and pinch that direct. So it's always got to be hard underneath. Now here in the reference, let me get it again. I know this is like a tough, complicated thing we're explaining here. If you look at this reference, look at that sharp edge. Now look at here, it's softer on top, harder underneath, but there is some sub-hards in there, some firm edges. Now when we're inking that, how are we going to explain that? How are we interpreting that into line? That is an art, my friends. You can go this way. You can go out, 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 pushing more in the middle. So thin, thick, thin, thin, thick, thin, thin, thick, thin, thin, thick, thin, allowing that to be a small core right there. But you need this to be hard. If you start shooting through this with your long lines, you're going to blow that hard edge right there, and you just blew the form. Now it will no longer look three-dimensional on a flat surface. Okay, so whether we're using cross-hatching or we're using clean tone, we still have to be respectful of where things pinch and where things cast, and we have to make sure those edges are hard and soft. And it is it's very difficult to express soft edges in ink. It's just, it's a crapper, man. I mean, it's so easy in charcoal. It's like, it's just take my finger and just smear it a little bit right there and I'm done. You know, just done, you know.
Question for you.
Yeah.
Do you ever sit down and maybe you'll analyze like a shadow shape like that as the plane like changes and rolls away from the light source? Would you sit and pull another piece of paper over and do multiple iterations of the same shape?
Not a bad idea. Not a bad idea. Yeah, and they even make some like, you know, like more vellums and stuff that you can actually ink on that you could just kind of throw over and just do a, yeah, I would definitely, and that's why your pencils are so important as well, is the pencil sets the tone for the directional flow of some of these lines that you're going to be doing. And as you get really intuitive with it, and you've done a lot of ballpoint pen and you've done a lot of graphite, you'll get better at making these choices on the fly like I'm doing. And you won't need to prep them so religiously.
Right. If you have to premeditate though, do it on another piece of paper.
Yeah, exactly. And explore. And that's why you see a lot of people do so many studies, you know, of these more complicated pieces when they're doing them, because they need to figure everything out before they're, you know, this is kind of what this is teaching you. It's like a chess match. It's surgical. It's premeditation of moves. It's working off of moves that you've made, and now you've got to make the next move, and you've got to reflect on the move you just made or the one before that. So everything's working off of everything else. And if you like that, and you like challenges, and you like multi-layered thinking, and you like problem solving of that sort, you're going to love inking. If you're intimidated by that, or you're afraid of that, or you have a hard time with that, it's going to be really hard. It doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, but it may mean that you just shy away from it because it's just too difficult or you don't process layered information that well, or it's difficult for you to do. But I do think as you learn to do this, I hope you can start seeing the value of how this would help with oil, where in oil paint, it's just mush it around and make it till it looks cool. And you can make mistakes and you can screw it up and you can fix it and scrub it, and then you go back and work on it some more. And as long as the paint's still wet, you can just keep moving it and moving it and moving it until it falls into place. In ink, it's like surgery. You got to put it down and leave it. And you mess up and you're in trouble. You know, you got to find a way to creatively make that a success now, because it's not coming out and you can't manipulate it. So it's a way more direct medium. It's like watercolor. So, you know, some of the most difficult mediums: inking, brush inking, quill inking, watercolor. Those are the really toughies, man. Oil painting is like a walk in the park in some ways compared to it. Now, elite oil painting, yeah, anything at elite level is really difficult. Elite landscape, you know, landscape's probably a little bit easier than figurative. But at an elite level, it's still, like when you get up to Thomas Moran and you get into all these famous, great landscape painters, it's as hard as really good figurative probably. But so anyway, there's a lot we could talk about, a lot we could address here. A lot of complexities in just this little thing we're doing. And I hope I'm not ruining it as I'm talking, because this really requires no talking, ideally. Listen to some good music, put some good jazz, you know, don't put Metallica on, don't put like crazy music on. Put some Miles Davis on, or not even that, probably put some like really chill classical music, something that you can just flow, has a nice rhythm, but it's very serene, very chill, and it's like meditating.
So no Red Bulls.
No Red Bulls, no Monster and Sped. Yeah, no, yeah, exactly. You got it, Luke. So now I'm coming here and I'm going to go over this oblique, and I'll look at this little light. Now, I'm not really rolling the oblique like you would think I would want to, but I already have this other crosshatch in there. So what the crosshatch, this going this way, kind of creates a faux version of a rolling, but gives it kind of almost a beveled look. Now this is way too light in this reflected, that's too much reflected light. So I could do a number of things. I could take my brush and I could dilute down some ink. Get some ink already, yeah, and then just cheat. I could do that in here. I could put a little bit of, now Frazetta did this all the time. He would just put washes into his shadows so that he could darken them so he'd do it like a watercolor, you know, like an ink watercolor. And he would do that all over the place. And really nice, you know, and a diehard inker would just crap, you know, they'd be like, oh, that's cheating, that's just ridiculous, you know. But I love it. I think it's a beautiful effect. And so again, I did that on some areas in here, you can see down in this shadow. Instead of flat blacking it, I wanted some reflected light, so I diluted the ink down a little bit and let the ink become a little lighter in there. And under that deltoid, now it looks like reflected light going up there. Instead of trying to go in there with cross-hatching and try to get that, which you could do. And some people would. And some people would say, that shouldn't be done that way. That's cheating. That's half-ass, whatever. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Again, I'm more about cool-looking arrangement, beautiful, you know. This is hard no matter what way you do it. I mean, there's nothing easy about depicting this particular piece. So let me do some quill.
Speaking of mediums, could we get a materials recap on what we're working with?
Okay,
and,
so
some of your favorites.
Yeah, so the nibs 107, 102 are always a good go-tos. That's these little guys probably down in this area. These two nibs. Then you get some of these manga nibs that are, you know, I would just try a bunch. Like on the course online in the supply, I say what I use, but I also just say, you know, buy a variety of nibs and start exploring and experimenting with them, because you're not necessarily going to like what I like. It's very, very personal. But as far as brushes, I would highly recommend the Da Vinci Maestro, the Raphael, or the Winsor Newton Series 7. Those are the three I like. There's probably some others out there, but if it's not broke, don't fix it. I like those ones. They are fairly expensive, so be prepared. But again, if you like what you're seeing, I would highly recommend you can go on for $49 and take the inking for 3 months, and you get the workbook. It's like 175 pages, just the first phase. And it has just chock full of great stuff. And it would help us too, for you guys to get some skin in the game. Number one, it's hard to do this stuff, but it's not a hard sales pitch on it, but it's worth the $49. I'm telling you, especially if you like inking. So get on there and take it. But those are the brushes. Here's the quills. I'm using Higgins, or you can use Charvin. There's all kinds of India inks, black inks. Make sure they're waterproof. Just get a good waterproof ink. You don't need a lot of tools. That's pretty much what I'm using.
And brush pens?
Brush pens, I mean, just go on jetpens.com and look up brush pens and just buy a nice one. $35, $29. I don't even know. They're all in Japanese, and I have no idea half the time. Again, any of them, most of them are comparable. You'll find people, again, if I did this all the time and I inked with a brush pen all the time, I would probably find my definitive favorite. This particular one, again, do not know the name of this one, but I have 3 or 4, and they're all pretty much comparable. You usually get what you pay for. So just know that. If you buy a good brush pen, maybe $30, $40, it's going to be nice. It's going to have a nice brush on it, nice tip on it, and it's going to be beautiful. You buy a little $5 one or something, $9 one, probably going to get a $5 brush pen, and it's not going to be phenomenal. So, all right. Hopefully that helped a little bit. Any other questions so far? No? Okay, so I'm going to do a little quill on his beard. I'm going to start his face, and I'm pretty warmed up now, so I'm just going to start playing around. See you later, Lucas. Really great having you around. Yeah. So on this, I could use a brush, but quills, man, they will lay down some delicate. Now, what a quill will do is it'll tear into the surface if you're heavy-handed. And that can cause some trouble if you have to do some other work on top of it or around it when it cuts through like that, because it'll just jack up the surface. Now I'm working on I think it's like a Bristol 300 or 400 pound Bristol, and it's got a nice finish on it. It takes the ink nicely. Again, there's a lot of different opinions of what to use surface-wise out there. I would highly suggest that you experiment with many and find the one that speaks to you, that you feel really works. You're going to have to do some experimentation. I wouldn't listen to anybody 100%. I'll tell you what I'm using. The supply list online is really, broken down into what I'm using for the phase. But then on top of that, I always preface it by saying I would try a bunch of different kinds of nibs, brands, styles, and just find the ones that really, I'm going to show you how to handle them. So again, with a nib, same thing, push hard, opens up, lays a thicker line. and more ink. Like I just laid a bead of ink there. Now I got to be careful with that because that's going to get messy. Now this is a very nice piece I'm doing here, so I shouldn't really be showing. I should get a scrap piece and show you. So I'm just going to ink this here. Now, again, on my reference, his beard is just flat black, man. And I think I want to open up a little bit of like the outside of the mouth. I want to kind of just show different handling. Now this nib, I put extra fine on it. I think it's like a 7. It's got good spring to it. And I'm using it more in a cross-hatching manner rather than a thick to thin manner, just to kind of create what's going on here.
So an inquiry about the online inking class. A user is wondering if I'm not very good at drawing. Is the inking class good for me then?
You know, I would highly more recommend that you spend some time in the fundamentals of drawing. No one wants to hear that. Is it going to hurt you to do some ballpoint pen? No, I'd probably say the ballpoint pen section of phase 1 inking would probably, because it's mostly technical exercises mixed with probably 4 or 5 hours of me demoing animals and people and heads and architecture and all that stuff in that phase in ballpoint pen. Now, ballpoint pen, you can use it pretty much, at any level, is very helpful, and I think a great tool to start familiarizing yourself with. The pressure sensitivity of quill and brush for someone who's just learning how to draw, I think it's probably not advised. So I would say probably for you right now, not the best call. Would love to have you take it, but I don't think it would be, it'd be ill-advised for me to advise you to do that. So I think I would say go on to the drawing program and just spend a while working your way up in that. Doesn't mean don't play around with ink. I mean, you can do whatever you want. It's not going to kill you, but it's probably a way, there's better things. If you're planning on trying to get legitimately good, it's like saying, should I step into calculus even though I don't really know basic arithmetic? I would say probably not the best call, Probably need to do Algebra 1, Algebra 2, Pre-Cal, Trigonometry, Pre-Cal, and then Calculus. You need to kind of work your way up the chain. And in some ways, art's no different. You jumping into vector calculus before some other, and that's what a lot of people do because the sequence of teaching art these days has been kind of lost. So there isn't a lot of great curriculums out there. I spent the last 26 years designing a curriculum, but not only just designing it, but putting it through the rigors of people getting good time and time again using it. So a seasoned curriculum is rare these days. There are a lot of good people teaching things, but not in a trajectory that has a lot of logic behind it. They jump too much. There's too many cooks in the kitchen. There's too many people trying to teach you too many different things too early, too soon. And so I think a lot of it is going to be common sense on the part of the student to know one's limitations, to know where one is, and then work off of that logic. You're probably going to need to, because a lot of the schools that you're going to find or be in aren't going to have a great curriculum probably, even though they may say that they do. Because again, inking to me it's a master class. I put it in the master classes on our, if you think of it, okay, if you look at how we design, I designed the online program, there's the core classes, and then there's, in drawing and painting, which are 5 phases of figure drawing, 5 phases of head drawing, 3 or 4 fundamental classes. Then you get into painting, doing the same thing, portrait painting, still life painting, landscape painting, figure painting, all 5 phases in length. And then you graduate to the master classes, like this. And that would be like you went through school and you did your bachelor's degree and you did your 4 years of undergrad. Now you're into your master's program, and then you go in for your PhD. This is a PhD, right? This requires PhD ability level. Okay, so you just have to ask yourselves, have I gone and got my bachelor's degree? Did I go through and get my fundamentals, And so to me, a bachelor's in art is all your fundamentals. It's perspective, it's head drawing, it's basic head drawing, it's basic anatomy, it's basic structure, it's all those things. And then you get to this level and you say, oh, I know my anatomy. I know that's the sternocleidomastoid, and I know it attaches clavicularly, and it also attaches onto the sternal notch, and I know that's the trapezius, and I know that's the deltoid, and it's three-headed, and there's the pectoralis, and that breaks into three heads. Oh, and that's what that indication there must be. You know, that must be the clavicle, and that must be the acromion process. You need to know it like that. Now, again, should you not ink? Do it if you want. But it's going to be hard because, you know, if you're trying to indicate this stuff and you have no idea what it is, it's just not going to work very well. That's all. It's not going to kill you. It's just not going to work great. So just be careful and just be smart and be logical.
So a viewer is asking if you can talk about your Bridgman book that's coming out.
Yeah, thank you. I am knee deep in it right now. I'm getting ready to start a Kickstarter, which you guys I hope will participate in. That would really help me a lot. It's a pretty robust study guide that accompanies the Bridgman Complete Guide to Drawing from Life. So it's 2 volumes, torso, front, back, and arms and legs, about 250 pages total with shortened video embedded in it. So it's an interactive book on anatomy. So you can watch me do little snippets of most of the drawings in it, about 3/4 of the drawings in it. And then if you want to take the course online, you can take it a la carte for, again, like probably $49. It will be 2 courses. And you can then use the book as, really the workbook that goes along with the course. And I'm just right now editing it. It's just, books are really expensive and difficult to do. And I knew it and I wasn't fully prepared for it. But right after the Inktober, and you guys are hearing this first, I will do a month of demonstration of Bridgman techniques that are going to be in the book. So each week I'll be doing a Bridgman different technique that's going to, you know, because there's different techniques that I cover in studying Bridgman, not just charcoal. There's ballpoint pen, there's Prismacolor, white on black. And so it's really a fun way to study it. And I've taught that class probably for 20 years with great success in the school. So it's really going to be a great opportunity. So that book's coming, and I'm trying to get the first volume out by just after Christmas probably, I'm hoping. And then the next one probably in the spring. But I'm going to, again, have to kickstart it. So a lot of it will depend on that and as far as how fast I can get it actually to you guys. But it's going to be a definitively cornerstone anatomy book in your library, for sure.
So relating to study, a viewer is curious if you know any tips or exercises of how to improve speed while not dropping much quality.
So speed comes from doing things slowly and methodically over a long period of time. And what really speed is not so much moving your hand fast in a medium, but making really intelligent, premeditated decisions that stack on top of each other without the need for so much correction, which gives the illusion of speed. Which means the better decisions I make on this, the faster it comes up, because I'm not stopping and trying to fix it all the time, which slows me down. And so when you're executing, there's no way to fake knowing what you're doing. Like these strokes, as I'm talking and doing them, there's no way that I could do what I'm doing right now if I wasn't fairly intuitive. And the only way I got fairly intuitive was doing tons of life work, studies from books, master studies, all these different things I'm showing you guys how to do in the online program or in these demos is the byproduct of years of slow, methodical, intelligent study that allows me to now do it fairly quickly and talk while I'm doing it. Now, there's no way that you can sidestep the long, methodical, correct studying and get to this level that I know of. So a lot of people are looking for the magic pen, the magic brush, the magic piece of information that's going to make it quick and easy for them to get good. And I'm telling you right now that it does not exist, period. It does not. And I know no one wants to hear that, but what does get you there is intelligent planning, persistence, patience, persistence, and perseverance. And someone knowing and leading you will cut that in a fraction of the time. So those of you out there that, you know, are self-taught or unfortunately self-taught, or what I want to encourage is that being self-taught is not something to be proud of. It's unfortunate. It's not efficient. It doesn't work well. It never has. It never will. And if someone happens to get good through those means, God bless them, but I feel sorry for them that they had to go that route. Because it's not easy. It's 10 times harder. You pick up tons of bad habits. Those habits, you know, you don't even know you have them half the time. And so if you can by any means, and I'm not just saying go to Watts Atelier, go to some good atelier, you know, and they're out there now, and you can look online, and you can go to Art Renewal Center and you can find them. Go online, try the online program, try ours, try Proco, try New Masters, try whatever. But find the one that works for you, and find the one that has a good curriculum flow, and one that can take you from point A to point B, not one that just impresses you with gazillions of awesome demos by awesome people that are already awesome. That's not how you get good. You got to sit down. You got to do the fundamentals. We've got to walk you through the fundamentals. Someone's got to show you the fundamentals. So I would say, you know, speed comes from slow, methodical execution, and then being able to distill that information you learn from that down into its essentials. So that's what we call indication. Indication is taking a complicated thing and stripping it down into its essentials and then representing it through its essentials. But you can't represent something that you don't know. You know, you can't represent and break something down that you don't know what it is in the first place. In order to know it in the first place, you got to go study an academic ear before you can indicate an ear like I just did in 4 strokes and still make it read like an ear. You got to know which parts are important, and you got to study Vanderpool, and you got to go look at casts, and you got to sit down, and you got to work from live models, and you got to do all that stuff. And that's the honest opinion. That's the honest truth. You know, and if you want to try to, you know, hack it or just do it some other way, go for it. I don't think it's going to work, but you can give it a shot, you know.
So a viewer is going back to the Bridgman book. They are wondering if you'll be putting it on Indiegogo as well. I explored that as like an alternative or addition to Kickstarter.
Yeah, I'm not a terribly astute. I mean, I've never done a crowdfunding, so I'm new to it all, and I just kind of, you know, I know there's a lot of different platforms. I just chose Kickstarter because it's probably one of the most, you know, seasoned and the most been around the longest. So, you know, unfortunately, I don't have a ton of time right now to research every different platform because I've been promising this book forever, and I really want to get it to you guys. So I'm kind of trying to expedite it as best I can without making foolish mistakes that are going to cost me a lot of time and money. Because all this stuff it comes down to a lot of time and a lot of investment in it. So I haven't totally opposed to that. I just don't know. Again, I don't have a ton of time to do copious amounts of research on these different platforms. You know.
Viewers interested in setting up a long-term master study like this on his own, and what things he should sort of look out for, and what sort of elements should I notice and practice when working on a piece like this? That'll be a long effort.
Well, again, pick something you're incredibly inspired by. So, you know, an artist that you really want to adopt their aesthetic, their working methodology, the way their work looks, really give some careful thought to who it is you're going to do the study of. And it should be something that really moves you because you're going to spend a lot of time on it and you don't want to burn out, you know. And it doesn't have to be someone I like, you know. I mean, again, like I just picked this because this piece inspired me enough to do it in oil and to do it a second time right afterwards for you guys in ink. And that's, saying a lot. So, because that's like eating the same dessert twice right after you just finished it. And I'm really moved. So I would say just pick someone that moves you. Do your due diligence as far as preparing whether you're going to do it in, gouache or oil or ink or digital or whatever it is medium that you're going to choose to do it in. Give it a lot of thought. Make sure you're comfortable in that medium, or get comfortable in it. You can get comfortable in it through doing master studies. So it's not bad to try to do a master study as you're learning a medium, but nothing's really going to hurt you. It's just going to frustrate you, because you're not going to be able to do well if you're not trained in certain things. So what I would say is, as you're doing these experiments in master studies or anything, just if you're frustrated, there's a reason, and the reason is probably knowledge. And what I would recommend then is that you track back why you're frustrated with that master study or whatever study you're doing, back to some logical way of rectifying that knowledge problem through some course of study that's intelligently planned. That means back to anatomy study with Bridgman, back to anatomy study through Loomis, back to anatomy study through Elliot Goldfinger. I don't know. And that's where, again, a guy like me will come in, is I've done a lot of the pick and shovel, and I can guide you to who you might want to study quicker and how how to do it. And so, or whether it's me or someone else like me, I would again, try to find someone that can guide you through that process of doing these things, and you lead by example. Like if I'm doing this as a master study online as an advanced class, and you like it, then you would then watch that and go through doing that same master study first, with me guiding you through each section, watching it, going back, trying a section, watching it, playing it back again. And that's the beauty of video, is you can go back and watch me lay that head in 52 times. If you were watching this next to me right now and we weren't videoing it, you would remember 1/50th of that head, and you have to see me do 50 heads like that in order to absorb what you could probably learn from that one head watching it 50 times. So you get more retention. You don't get as much variety if you're watching the one video, but you can extrapolate that information and pull it into your other efforts. And that's what you would need to do, or I would advise you to do if you're studying in that manner. Hopefully that makes sense.
So a materials related question. Is there a methodology between the use of the brush versus the quill in the piece? Again, like if I see, I could probably got the similar effect to his beard with a brush instead of a quill, but I kind of want to also just show you using a little bit of quill, using a little bit of brush, showing you how I blend the two together. I prefer the brush. I think because again, it just handles well in my hand. I like it. I like the feel of it. I like the pressure sensitivity of it. I prefer it. Doesn't scratch up my surface. Doesn't rip up my surface. It's a very sensitive tool too if you have a really good hand. So I would say it's just, I wouldn't say 6.5 of one, half a dozen the other. It's really more the technique that you're going for, the look and stylistic approach that you would like to get. And those are the things that would factor into determining whether you go for a quill or whether you go for a brush. Is it looking more like a Frazetta? Well, Frazetta used quill a lot too, but primarily brush for his finished work. But is it going to look like a Heinrich Klee, or is it going to look like a Joseph Clement Cole? If you want that scratchy Cole look, then you probably would want to go for a quill instead of a brush. I can emulate that look with a brush, but it would probably be a little bit easier to get it with a quill. Viewers wondering if there are any graphite artists who specialize in graphite to improve his own graphite drawings.
Oh, I mean, just shoot. Graphite's an interesting one because a lot of people use a lot of nitrum and these different vine charcoals to a really tight level, and you just don't see as many people going graphite. They usually go more like high-end charcoal, and I'm not quite sure why that is. So when I'm thinking about, I'm just racking my brain right now thinking, graphite artists, and I know they're out there. I don't know them by name. I know we have a lot at our school that are phenomenal, including myself. But I don't remember when I was studying it, who I didn't remember. I don't think I I studied it through doing it from life. I did not go to any one particular artist. So it's a good question. It stumped me a little bit because I'm trying to think back to who I studied, and I can't come up with anyone. I studied it as in long graphite classes from the live model, where I would do 15 to 20 hour live model finishes from life, and that was incredibly beneficial to learning the medium. And it's similar to inking in a lot of ways. You could probably adapt a lot of inking cross contouring by studying inkers in graphite, because they do very similar styles of indication. You know, graphite lends itself more to tight line work than charcoal does, in my opinion. And so I think you could look at a lot of inkers and just try to ape their style by doing ink copies in graphite rather than ink.
I think also artists who have like a smoother like painting style could be better interpreted through graphite as well. So if you're spending like a long time on a master study, then perhaps doing that in graphite.
Yeah, I mean all that. I mean, again, play around with it, have fun with it, tussle with it. It's not. There's no perfect anything. It's just I used to take Gibson inks, and I would do oil paintings of them, of groups of his guys. I would take one of his scenes out of his book, and I would paint it in oil, inventing the color, translating the line into tone, and then translating the tone into color. So I was inventing, it was like a 3-layer invention. It was looking at somebody that has this beautiful poetic ink style, and then interpreting it into oil paint, and painting a gestural wet into wet oil painting from a Gibson. No one ever told me to do that. I just thought it would be kind of fun. And I would sit around, and after a while, when you're training as hard as we train to get good at this stuff, you kind of got to come up with ways to entertain yourself, because it gets really monotonous after a while. And you want to start being creative with how you learn and do fun things. And I wouldn't say don't expect someone to always tell you exactly what to do, but you also allow yourself some freedom and fun to just enjoy exploring the way you learn, and find out what that is, because the way I learn is not going to be exactly the same as the way you learn or the way anybody learns. So it's about being flexible and being outside the box thinking, learning to think outside the box. I'm going to take a little break because I haven't taken a break yet. And this is coming out really nice, that little head combination there, with a hand gripping his top of his head and the other one on his shoulder. Any last questions? What time is it anyway? I don't even know what time we got.
It's 8:40.
Okay, so we started at 7, 8.
7 o'clock.
So yeah, I think I'm going to wrap it up pretty soon. I'll probably just do it till 9, 2 hours. That's plenty of watching this stuff happen. So maybe what I'll do is I'm going to take a little break. I'll come back and I'll take some final questions as I just wrap up this guy's head here, and that's probably going to be it for the evening.
There's one quick one about,
sure.
Since we're on the topic of mediums, a viewer is asking about your experience with digital painting and I guess how you feel about it.
I love it. I haven't done a lot of it because I've been waiting, and I'm about to try it, actually. I did a little bit of messing around with it, but back when Cintiqs were just coming out and I was using a Wacom, and I didn't like the idea of looking at the screen and having to not look at your hand, and then I didn't really want to invest in a full Cintiq because I was so heavy into the traditional. I didn't see any value for myself personally at that time. Had I been going into heavy concepting, I would have adjusted and done it. But I love it. I think it's now getting tactilely sensitive enough to where I feel like I want to try starting to use it, because the pens are getting responsive enough to where I feel like the styluses and stuff now would lend to my dexterity.
Yeah.
So I probably will mess around with it soon. I think it's a procedural medium that has not yet reached its full potential, not even close, because the materials aren't quite as sensitive yet. I think it has unparalleled saturation and color, because you're painting with more light,
Yeah.
and things like that. So I think that's very tempting, but I also think it's heavily abused. I think, there's some beautiful stuff being done with it, so I can't say anything other than it fascinates me greatly, but I haven't done a huge amount of experimenting with it yet.
Sort of a second part to that question, how do you feel, I guess, artistically about like using grayscale painting or Photoshop cheats? So
I think
using the medium to its fullest extent, I suppose.
I think the people that use it to the fullest extent are ex-painters that transitioned into digital and already know how to paint.
Yeah.
So they're able to reflect back, and like I was talking about with the anatomy, they're able to learn how that tool indicates, and then cross-reference it with other tools like inking and gouache and oil,
Yeah.
and know how to indicate in that. So then they can tell what it can and can't do very quickly, and then they can adapt it to similar effects that they used to get in other mediums.
Yeah.
And those are the ones that seem to use it to the fullest potential. I think a lot of people that are photo bashing and doing this and that, they're great collagers, and it's really a beautiful design sense around it, but it's not painting.
Right.
It's not mixing colors. It's a completely different animal. So it's totally fine if you find enrichment in that, and you find that it feeds your soul, and that you find that way of expressing yourself is completely makes you complete and you feel great with it, then I would say, well, there's nothing wrong with it. But if you're using it and saying, this is kind of like the computer doing the work for me, and I really don't feel like I'm actually doing the painting. I feel like it's doing most of the heavy lifting for me, and I'm just kind of telling it, what layers and this and that to do. I would say, for me, I would feel a little bit like I'm not actually painting. The computer's painting for me. So I wouldn't get the same satisfaction out of it personally because I like craftsmanship. So I like the tactile sensitivity of the paints, the feeling of the canvas, the smell of the paints. All those things really move me and actually, feed me, So, cool. Okay, we're going to take a little break, and I'll be back in a minute. Thanks, you guys, for being patient with this. It's coming out cool, though. I'm liking it. All right. Okay. Let me know. Is it on? Okay, everybody. I'm just going to finish up the top of his head and finish up with any questions you have. Thank you for being patient. I know I don't care who's demoing what, it's hard to watch. So thanks for tuning in. Thank you for supporting the school and just what we do. I know it's pretty intense stuff, but we really want to give you the information the way I feel that I was given it, but also the way I've learned over the last 26 years of teaching. And again, just teaching so many really good people that have gone on to amazing things. I was, again, just down visiting an old student of mine, Stan Prokopenko, and many of you know him from Proko. And I think Stan was with me for like 10 years, but wonderful thing that he's doing also. So I just want you to know that what we do is highly specialized. It's geared towards, people that really want to take their work to an elite level. And we do walk you through the fundamentals. So if you ever do want to try, just try it for a month and see what you think. And if it doesn't work for you, that's okay. You're not locked into anything. So, go try something else. So a lot of it, I think when you guys are talking about training or getting good, what I would advise is just don't look for the quick fix. It doesn't exist. Just go the old school route of digging in and slowly learning. And yes, you can do digital on the side and make some money doing that while you're learning your traditional, and let your traditional come up a little more organically because it's going to take longer, and just balance between the two. But don't not learn traditional because it's intimidating, because it takes too long, or it seems too hard. Just be patient with it and learn to love it, and this is really fun to do. I don't know if that translates, but I love to solve problems, visual problems. And that's really, almost all art is distilled down into visual problem solving. Whether you're doing it, again, through digital or ink or whatever, it's all just problem solving.
So viewers wondering if you have experimented with doing quick sketch with these materials or just with ink.
It's funny. I did last term on our Friday night workshop at the Brick and Mortar, our actual atelier. I would do half the class in charcoal and then half the class in ballpoint pen. I wouldn't do it in brush pen or any of these ones. They're just too meticulous and too difficult. And if because all of our quick sketches are 2 minutes or 3 minutes or 5 minutes max. So ballpoint pen's hard enough to do a 5 minute really nice sketch. But I did some really beautiful little drawings I was really proud of. And I was thinking of even teaching a ballpoint pen quick sketch class in the future, just having everybody use ballpoint pen for the whole thing. Something I've been playing around with wanting to do because I think it's really helpful for definitive decision making for sure. Yeah. I'm going to move this because what I'm doing is I'm radiating around the folds in this kind of little wrap that he has around his head, and I want to kind of do it. But yeah, inking is one of my favorite. Ballpoint pen, you can find it anywhere. You can take it on a plane. You can find it in a restaurant. Your hotel always has pens in it, so you can always just sketch. And if I go into a hotel room and I didn't bring any art supplies, I always just grab the ballpoint pen and start to sketch on the notepad that they leave there for you or whatever. And I'm always sketching little invented figures or invented heads or skulls or, and again, when I'm doing invention ink work, what I'm trying to do is regurgitate or bring forth information that I've memorized or I think that I've memorized and see how well I'm doing with that. And that allows me to really kind of practice my intuition, my acquired knowledge, the knowledge that I can use to invent, manipulate. Like when I'm talking, I might be manipulating this eye's eye, or I might be doing something in there, and I'm not thinking about it because it's memorized. I've committed it to memory. I've practiced it so much that now I can do it while I'm talking. I can do it without thinking. That's intuitive knowledge. And intuitive knowledge, in my opinion, is essential for high-level execution as a professional. Like if you're going to work at Disney or DreamWorks and you're going to be a concept like Nathan Falks or one of those guys, you're going to need to be intuitive with your knowledge base. because you've got to be working under adverse conditions quickly, efficiently, and just moving really, really well through that. And so that's my take on that.
That really relates to an earlier question where a viewer was asking about drawing from imagination.
Mm-hmm.
And so, so just doing studies.
Well, first you have to study it academically. And the way you can do it is like, say, for example, you're studying the Bridgman with me when we do this class coming up. And we're working with a certain torso drawing that's, got some good meat to it. I mean, it's got some good information to it. And I'm walking you through it. And you draw it maybe from Bridgman first, you attempt it. Then you watch the video of me doing it, and you see my interpretation of it. Now you do it a second time but you do it while watching me, and you stop it, and you go back and watch me, and you try it. And maybe you do that same drawing 5 times that night, maybe 4 or 5 times, maybe more. And then you take a break, and you go have a cup of coffee, you go have dinner or whatever, go to the gym, get a little workout in, come back home, and spend another half an hour to an hour, put the book away, put the information away, and draw it and see if you can draw it as well out of your memory. If you can't, it means you don't know it. Okay? So that's an easy way. So invention is nothing more than that. You just have to regurgitate information that's been retained through proper study. And that a lot of people don't get that. They don't know that, that's how you're supposed to learn how to invent. First, you got to draw it 50 times, and then you got to draw it out of your memory and make it look like you weren't looking at it, and that's figure invention. Now do tons of that, and then you can sit down and group together this grouping of figures from your memory good enough to where you could show it to an art director, show it to a client, and say, this is what I think it's going to look like. Okay, now go book the models, get them, shoot them, and now let's do a high-level finish of it. But so invention can be used for concepting an original idea, sketchbooking your ideas to try to come up with ideas for paintings you might want to do. If you look at Frazetta's rough works, you can see all these little doodle sketches of the Death Dealer's first iteration when he was just doodling it out of his memory while he was sitting and probably the kids were playing stickball or something, or he's sitting on the couch after dinner, just doodling, letting his imagination run wild, cultivating this, what's going to ultimately become one of his most iconic images, but he's not going to just go right to the finish. He's going to sit and doodle it in ballpoint pen or sketch it, and he's going to sit and invent it, and he has to know enough about a horse, enough about armor, enough about anatomy to put a guy on a horse in a scene and make it look believable. Otherwise, he's just going to be gibberish, right? I mean, so how's he going to, take it any further? Now, with him, he might actually be able to extrapolate from that small sketch all the way up to more finished sketches, to another, up to an actual finish without actually getting a model. Mm-hmm. But chances are he probably shot his hand, or he shoots this, or a little bit of reference, or he goes and researches it. Now you go on Google and you look up armor and you'd find, what does chainmail look like, and you do all this stuff.
Just to elevate the work.
Yeah, to get it to be a finish or a nice, what we would call a finish. The beautiful thing, the thing about Frazetta that you have to remember is he probably had an eidentic memory, which is a photographic memory. And that's something that is incredibly helpful for invention, obviously. And I think Bouguereau had that, and I think also Alma-Tadema had that, Sir Lawrence Alma-Tadema. There's been a number of people throughout history that did things that were so uncanny from memory that in order to do that, you would have to have the ability to imprint imagery in your head that's photorealistic. And so the reference is your head, whereas in most of us need to look at a piece of reference to copy it in order to do that. We don't have those powers. You can build, like I've built an incredible visual memory, but I did it the way I told you, which is the hard way, which is having to sit and draw it 5, 10 times, then repeat it from memory, then go back and draw it 5 or 10 more times, then repeat it again from memory, and then after a while it sticks. Now, after years and years of doing that, you may be able to do it through 5 or 6 drawings instead of 32 drawings, and your muscle gets stronger, just like a muscle memory in your body through working out. But you have a regimen of studying that cultivates that muscle, and it's not just sit down with no knowledge and start inventing stuff. That doesn't work, and not well anyway.
Relating that to this study, a viewer asks, when doing master studies like this, how much of this is you interpreting, and how much are you being faithful to what you're observing the reference?
Well, it's a lot of it. Yeah, it's a ton of interpretation, because look at this is what I'm looking at. There's no cross-hatching anywhere in that. I've got to get the illusion of a similar look. Now look how subtle this is compared. I mean, this is not even close because ink is just not as subtle as oil for representing form in some ways. I mean, yes, you can do it at an elite level, very subtle, but there's going to be an interpretation that has to occur between this torso and this torso because this is clean tone and this is fragmented tone representing, information. So it's an interpretation. There's a lot of room for that I have to invent, manipulate, guess, whatever. So it's really good for your brain. It's like really, really, really good exercise for drawing or painting, this kind of stuff.
Right.
Yeah, really good for you.
Especially like information that you have to inject your own knowledge into, like the shadows, for
Yeah.
example, where
Well, there's 100 ways you could do it.
yeah,
And there's no one could say that is the definitive perfect way and that's how you must do it. There's 52 right ways to do it. And that makes it hard because it also makes it easy. It makes it hard because you have a lot of choices, but it makes it easy because you don't have to make it perfect. So you have a lot of room to explore. Yeah. Yeah. So I think we're going to wrap it up, you guys. Next week will, I think, be Doug, or it might be Erik. Can't remember which one we have. Do you know Stan? Or not Stan. Trav. Doug. So next week is Doug, and I don't know what he's going to be demoing because it's up to him. And then Erik will be after that, and then I'll come up and finish up the month with another ink. I don't know what I'm going to do yet, but it'll be something fun, something cool. And we'll have a whole month of celebrating inking and releasing 3 different distinct phases, each one about 15 to 20 hours in length. So to get through one of those phases would probably take you a month or so or 2, and you might want to do that along with a drawing phase or a portrait phase or figure phase, and don't just hyper obsess about inking. Maybe do it once a week, twice a week, have it be your inking night, and then go through one of the exercises and piece it together that way, and you'll get better and better. But it is a cumulative thing. It is an advanced language, and treat it like an advanced language, and have fun with it, but be respectful of it if you want to do it well, and you'll learn a ton. And it'll be great for your dexterity, if nothing else. So thanks again, you guys. We'll see you soon, and thanks for joining us. I really appreciate it, and look forward to more Friday Night Lives, basically 2 months of every week. So we're going to be catching up on the ones that the months that we have not been doing them in the next couple months. So keep joining us, and keep telling your friends, and keep pushing play. Thanks so much. Cheers.